Berkeley has had a very tough week.
Yes.
Does anybody else feel the weight of it? Man, the big game. From my house every day, I can hear the helicopters over campus, which are the news media, filming the Occupy protest at Sproul Plaza, and then there was a police raid. We've even had a horrifying and horrific day at our business school that we never want to see another one of in any form here on our campus. I mean, we have kind of run the table this week in terms of things that can happen to you. And what makes that kind of unusual is, in my neighborhood, stuff like this is not a thing. It's like our everyday life. But it's not supposed to happen at college. I mean, for crying out loud. You know, Berkeley has an 80% turn down rate. If you get into this school, everything's supposed to be okay for you for the rest of your life after that. I mean, we have protests, but they're kind of more of an aesthetic thing. They're so later on you can say, well, I went to Berkeley and there were protests there, and that's ups your cool factor at parties later in your life, but it's not supposed to actually do anything, you know, and there's not supposed to be violence no matter what. None of that is supposed to happen. This town, this campus are they're wombs, they're greenhouses where you germinate the dream, the career that you will eventually live out. You know, you go to other schools to get a job, you go to a place like Cal or live in a city like Berkeley to create the dream, create the career that you want to then make your occupation from there on out. And the kind of week we've had is not in the handbook anywhere. It is not on the website. It is not advertised by the city. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and we never bring up weeks like this. It's not supposed to be part of the package. Now, Jan and I certainly believe that our city and campus are dream-creating places. That's why we came here. We moved here because we wanted to spend our last couple of laps working with the kind of people that could get into a university like this and live in an area like Berkeley and the larger East Bay. People who are going to shape the future, because we believe that if we turn our future over to our Creator, God, through faith in God's only Son, Jesus, that those dreams become different and that we can literally reshape the world from this place. We can make the planet something that would not be otherwise without the kind of people that will come through the East Bay and the related areas of Silicon Valley and so forth. That's why we came here, and it's a great thing. It's a great place to live. I think this is the most creative city in the world, and that's why I'm a resident of this place and of nowhere else. It's just kind of amazing. And once you are coming out of a place like this, you emerge germinated, you know, kind of an R&D sapling out of the greenhouse of creativity here. And man, I know how to beat a metaphor to death, don't I? But you emerge from that, and now your dreams are on track, and you're ready to go out and be a world changer. And the school knows this, the town knows this. Both of them advertise all the famous people who lived here. Have you noticed this on Wikipedia and on the website? All the famous alums of a place like Cal, Chris Pine and John Cho, the two stars of the Star Trek movie, you know, it's unbelievable. Jack Bauer from 24 claims to have a master's degree from Cal. It's just the kind of place that makes kings. And once I've achieved my dream and I've climbed up the ladder and my influence is, what could go wrong? Right? There was another king. His name was Dave. 3,000 years ago, he was the monarch of what was then called the United Kingdom of Israel. And he is probably best known to most of the people in the world for his representation in a 17-foot tall piece of marble created by a sculptor named Michelangelo, unveiled in 1504, that still sits in the city of Florence, Italy. Now that's sort of the snapshot in stone of King Dave. But the movie of King Dave is contained in the Old Testament books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. You know, he wasn't always a king. Before he becomes a monarch, this young man is about as far from a royal family as a young man can get. He's just a kid. He's out in the South 40. His job is to take care of Daddy's animals, his sheep, on the family sheep ranch, while his older brothers, who are all bigger and stronger and tougher and more mature and also much more in line for the inheritance once Dad passes away, because the youngest brother gets nada in this system. These guys are sort of in this dominant position. They're the alpha males. And then here's little Dave, and he's just sent off, go to the farthest field, the farthest pasture, and just take care of the sheep out there, while we tend to the more important things like managing all of Dad's money. And while Dave is doing this out in the middle of nowhere, he's on his own. He learns self-reliance. He has to defend the sheep against mountain lions and bears and all kinds of other predators of every sort. And it's just Dave and his sling and his stick and the flock of sheep. And he is the human barrier between the sheep and everything that threatens those animals. And he puts his life on the line over and over and over to make sure that nothing that harms them can ever get through him. Any wolf, any bear, any lion who's going to get to the sheep has to go through Dave first. And of course, sitting out there with a bunch of farm animals that don't talk back, it gives you a lot of time to think. And Dave discovers that he is not only quite a fighter, but he is also quite a musician. And in those quiet times of thinking, the babbling brook starts to sound like a melody line. And the bleating of the sheep starts to sound like harmony. And the blowing of the wind like someone's fingers running over the lyre, while someone else plays the flute softly in the background. And before you know it, words start to pour out of Dave. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. One day a prophet came to town, Sam. And he went to the family, all the older brothers, and Jesse the dad, and said, you know, God has told me that it's time to anoint someone as a king. Now, it was never God's plan for this country to ever have a king, but the people demanded it. We want a king to be like the other nations. And so sometimes, as they're about to find out, the worst thing that can happen is for God to give you what you want the most. Can I get a hearty go Bears from everybody? So Sam says to Jesse, all right, bring out all the sons, and he trots them all out. Big, strapping boys, you know, all with MBAs and grad school degrees, and they've got all have their iPads and their cell phones. It's just, I'm sorry, I have to take this. Sam lines them all up, says, well, it could be him. Said, no, he's not the one. How about this one? He's handsome. He's good. No, he has bad breath. This one here, no, he looks kind of shifty. I don't think it's him. No. Listen, none of these guys are going to do. I know it's in your family. Don't you have anybody else? And they say, well, we do have this little runt, this little lad, this boy, this nothing, this Mr. Gets Nothing When Dad Dies fellow named Dave, and he is off in the South 40, and he is watching the animals. And Sam says, all right, let's go talk to him. And at the instant he sees Dave, he says, this is the one. Sometimes in God's way of doing things, it's the least likely person that becomes the most influential. Samuel takes oil, as was the practice in the ancient world, and pours it over young Dave's head, anoints him king, announces that he is going to be the person that is going to lead the nation. But he doesn't go directly to the throne. The current king, a man named Saul, has problems. He has bad problems. He has these episodes, these fits, these times of torment where he feels like he's just about losing his mind. And these things can even become threatening and dangerous to the people around them. The only thing that helps King Saul, the first king of the nation, to feel better is if someone can play soothing music. And so Saul sends his staffers who have heard about Dave to bring the young man to become part of his staff, and he becomes a court musician. And Dave's playing is so wonderful that apparently even the tormented King Saul hears the sound of the flute and the blowing of the wind, and it has a calming effect on his spirit, although not without pretty severe complications at the same time. One day during the middle of all this, a group called the Philistines decide to invade the country. And they feel bold enough to do this, to take on the armies of Israel, for one simple reason. They have the biggest soldier anyone has ever seen. A man named Goliath. He is massive. He is enormous. He is bigger than an offensive lineman. He is just hugely tall and horrifically well armed, and is able to crush a normal soldier probably with his bare hand. And he comes out before the armies of Israel and he taunts them. You bunch of sissies and cowards. What's wrong with you? Won't anybody come out and face me? And every day he comes out and taunts them on the battlefield. And all of the Saul soldiers look back and forth and say, I don't really want to go, you know. Volunteers? No, I don't think, I'm going to go back and cook something over the campfire, make the camp. I'm not going to go out and fight it, because whoever does that is going to die. Until one day Dave arrives on the camp, brings some food to his brothers, and says, why are you all cowering in the face of this giant? He's only big. He's not right. So there's a difference between being big and being right. He's only big. He's not right. God's with us in this. If God is with us, as we sang this morning, even somebody big can't be against us. That's something we all need to remember. Can somebody say, go Bears?
Go Bears.
If God is with us, even something big isn't going to stand against us. And so David goes out with nothing but what he was armed to protect the sheep with, loads up his sling, and kills the giant. And before you know it, there is so much adulation about Dave that Twitter just shuts down. I mean, have you seen those moments where you try to tweet something? Probably something you shouldn't. And Twitter tells you, I'm sorry, come back later, we're busy. All the circuits are completely saturated. You can't take any more messages. And suddenly Dave, not the king, is the single most important celebrity in the whole nation. And people are hailing him as their savior. King Saul, being a person of high drama, does not take this well. He's the high maintenance king. He is envious. He's thin-skinned. He is just completely unable to handle the idea that anyone else can get any of the credit for anything, an attitude that many of us have seen locally, and decides that he's going to kill Dave to make sure he has no competitors. He chases him all over the landscape. Dave escapes time after time after time. And to his credit, because of his loyalty to King Saul, his integrity and character, he refuses to strike back against the king even when he could. Ultimately, in another invasion, Saul and his son Jonathan, who was Dave's best friend, are killed in combat. Dave becomes the king of the northern part of the country, called Judah. The leaders of the southern part of the country also submit themselves to him, and he becomes the monarch of this united area. And at the age of 30, he is a war hero, a musician who contributes 75 of the Psalms are credited to him. He is a national and international figure, and he is Ryan Reynolds handsome. In other words, Dave is the John Kennedy of the first millennia BCE. He is a rock star. He has arrived at 30 after passing through all these challenges as a 20-something at a place where the average person in the ancient world or the modern world cannot even imagine. Talk about a 1%er. This is more like a 0.00001% situation to be in this sort of context. And imagine what he's thinking at this point. I'm awesome. I'm awesome. I mean, sure, I have a lot of wars, but hey, I'm good at that. You know, I write songs. That's a chick magnet right there. You know, I'm super wealthy. You know, I'm so good looking. It's unbelievable. I'm so smart. It makes my head pound to think about how smart I am. And since we captured the city Jerusalem from the people who originally owned it, I got this great town to live in. They built me this unbelievable palace. I have this mansion where I can live. We brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city. Now I can even go to church here between all the wars. And this is just incredible. I'm awesome. Friday night, Jan and I went to see the Justin Timberlake movie In Time, which is a science fiction story of a society where time is the currency. People are genetically engineered to stop aging at the age of 25. In other words, you're frozen right where you are. And yet, in order to prolong your lifespan, frozen at the age of 25, you have to accumulate time the way people try to accumulate wealth today. And the result is a very small handful of people with massive amounts of time, the time rich, who rule like kings over enormous ghettos of people who have only minutes to live, the time poor. And I sat there, I walked out of the movie and I thought, maybe the occupiers have a point. It just felt a little too close to my own country to be comfortable. I mean, I heard on the news this week that Newt Gingrich got $37 million from healthcare companies to act as a sounding board. And I'm listening to this on NPR, and I'm thinking, shoot, man, I would have done it for 35. You know, I would have. And you listen to numbers like that, and all of this is legal. There's nothing unethical or immoral, anything about it. It's just business. It's just the Washington game. I'm not trying to condemn or pick him out in particular. But when I heard numbers like that for a product like that, I flashed back to the movie, and I started thinking, is everybody just gone insane in this country? I mean, is that where we are now, where we have handfuls of kings leading masses of sheep? Is that, how do we get here? Middle-class neighborhoods are shrinking all over the United States. They're declining in number rapidly, while rich and poor neighborhoods are growing just as rapidly, and rich people are choosing to live only with each other now and not with anybody else. I'm awesome. Really, I'm the king. And I'm only 30. I'm so awesome. You know, at 30 years old, my goodness, in the context of the ancient world, I must have at least 3 or 4 more years to live. It's awesome. See, it's good to be king. That's why everyone wants the office. But there are some downsides to a monarchy. One of them is the people who are around you in leadership won't let you do any real stuff anymore because it's too dangerous. The Joint Chiefs of Staff aren't going to let President Obama land in the night with a special ops team somewhere in a commando raid. That's not going to happen, even though technically he's their commander-in-chief. And the military leaders around David wouldn't let him participate in foreign wars anymore either. They made him stay home. And so one spring, which is the time armies preferred to fight in the ancient world because you had food available in the fields and you also had the weather you needed for marching and those kinds of things, another foreign war is underway, and the armies are out fighting another tribe that ends with I-E-T-E-S, and David is stuck at home. And I love this passage in 2 Samuel where it says, he got up off the couch. And you kind of have this image of him laying on his huge overstuffed red leather couch with a 70-inch plasma screen up on the wall, flipping from Sports Center to Law and Order reruns and going back and forth because the guy's got nothing to do. He has people for that. You name the task, I've got people for that. People will take care of that. And so the scripture says he got up off the couch, which is a miracle for a man. And he begins going out onto the flat roof of the palace and he starts walking around. Dude is bored. He's nothing going on in his life. He's reached kingliness, and instead of connecting him with the whole world and giving him all of this richness of experience, what it has done is cut him off. The psalmist uses a phrase, I'm like a bird on a housetop. And this bird's name is Dave. Met a man on the road about a year ago whose brother is the guitarist for a very, very well-known rock and roll band, which is headquartered in the East Bay. And he told me, while his brother loves what he does, the truth of the matter is his life is one of complete isolation from people because everybody wants something. And so while he has achieved rock star status, it has made him a bird on a rooftop. Because you just don't go to the Berkeley Bowl and buy a $12 head of organic cabbage when your face is known to everyone who subscribes to iTunes and your name is a household word among music fans. You're done as a person. And so is Dave. Standing on the top of the roof, he looks out and he spies a beautiful young woman bathing. Now, this sounds like one of those phony baloney Hollywood movie bubble bath scenes. You know, they're in every other film. How many bubbles will there be, won't there be, that kind of thing. But it's not. This is a ritual bath for purification, for purposes of indicating that this woman's monthly period has come to an end. That's what it was. It's got nothing to do with our Hollywood version of it. And so the king spies her in the midst of this and decides he cannot live without this woman. And so, just as if he were an American politician, he sends a staffer to go get her and bring her back. And I've probably seen too many movies, but the staffer goes and we just watched the whole Kennedy series, so that's very much in my mind. So the staffer goes and finds her, brings her back to the palace, and the result of the relationship is that this woman, Bathsheba, now is bearing Dave's child. She goes home, discovers the pregnancy, sends word to the king, and it's freak out time. What are we going to do? Dave comes up with a clever plan. He says, we'll bring your husband home from the war. He can stay with you for a few days. That will make him seem to be the father, and we'll all be out of the woods. And I assume, although this isn't in the scripture, the assumption kind of is that once he goes back, we can, hire babysitters and resume our previous relationship, and no one will be the wiser. So Uriah, the husband, does come home from the war. And Dave says, hey, we're so glad you're back. Why don't you go see your wife and take a few days off. It's leave, and then we'll send you back to the front. And Uriah, being a stand-up guy, says, absolutely not. I'm not going to go and live with my wife when my brothers in arms are living under trees in fields in harm's way. I'm going to stay right here. It's not going to happen. He keeps his word, and he goes back to the front. But this time he's carrying a letter from King Dave. And the letter is to General Joab, who is the commander of the armies of the nation, and it says this: look, Joab, I want you to put Uriah at the very front line of the combat. I want him to be in the most dangerous place you can find. Now, the battle at hand is a siege of a city, and so what Uriah arranges for, or what Joab arranges for, is for Uriah to be right up against the walls, where it's going to be close quarter combat with swords and spears. In other words, you hack each other to death. But he avoids that only to be killed by the enemy's archers. He dies full of someone else's arrows. And word returns to the king that Uriah is dead. Plan B has succeeded. And so the scripture says that David waited until Bathsheba was finished with the period of mourning for her husband. He's fine with murder, he's good with adultery, but he observes the ceremonial law of so many days for mourning. He's the king. You got to make it look good. And when that mourning is over, he takes Bathsheba into his house. She becomes his wife, and of course, marriage now backfills the righteousness that was missing from the original relationship. Would you agree with me that it doesn't really work that way? Righteousness is a real-time commodity.
I mean, it's like fresh milk. It doesn't last very long. It can't be backfilled later into a situation. But Dave's feeling good. All of my bases are covered. All our loose ends are tied off. I have no threat and I have no exposure, except that the scripture records this. The thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And so a second prophet shows up. Here's a warning. Don't ever put God in a position to need to send the second prophet. Live in obedience to prophet number 1. So prophet number 2 never has to show up. Can I get a hearty go Bears? The prophet, his name was Nathan, and with no preamble, he just breaks into this story. And he says these words in 2 Samuel chapter 12, beginning the first verse. Nathan says this to David. He says, "There were 2 men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought, and he had brought it up, and it grew up with him and his children. It used to eat of his morsel and drink his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him." Do you have a family pet that you just couldn't live without? Like a dog or a cat that if they died, you would just grieve, and you get so bonded sometimes to animals, and they almost seem to have a human type personality, and they have a name. And I still remember my first cat, Oscar. He was this really mangy looking orange tabby, and he was my favorite pet that I ever had. He would just jump in my lap every time I was in the house, and you'd pat him, and he would make that engine noise, that cats make when they're purring, and he was really friendly, and he'd always rub up against your leg and all this, and he was so fun and so kind of goofy and weird, and we really enjoyed him. This little ewe lamb, this little female lamb, was more than a farm animal to this poor man's family. This was someone that they brought in as part of their family. This man would take the little lamb apart, and what the scripture's saying is that the poor man would feed the lamb from his own cup. That the lamb would put its muzzle down into the man's cup, and he would hold, say, bread or whatever he was eating at the time up to his mouth, and he would let the lamb, this is not giving the dog leftovers, this is having the lamb at the dinner table with you. This is having your kids around, having your kids play with the animal and run around with them and horse around with the lamb, and making this animal really literally part of your family, to the point that when the rich man, who must honor the traveler's request for hospitality, because that's obligatory in the ancient world and in much of the modern world as well, the rich man says, I have a lot of sheep, but the prices are high this season. I really don't feel like giving one of them up, but I know the poor guy next door, what's the difference between 1 and 0, really? And so he simply takes it, not because he has to, but because he can. King-making contexts like the one we live in tell you that what we're going to engineer for your life is the change from living doing what you have to living doing what you can. The man does it just because he can. There's no reason for it. When David hears the story, verse 5, you see his reaction. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, talking about the rich man that took the sheep away. And he said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity." And Nathan said to David, "You are the man." dang, I hate it when an illustration applies to me. Ah! It's supposed to be about you. You're the one that needs fixed. But the second prophet, you're the man. Nathan goes on to tell David, the sword will never depart from your house. And that everything that you have tried to get away with in private is going to happen to you now in public. And so Bathsheba's child dies. And David's dear son, Absalom, rises up against him in a civil war and is killed by General Joab in a battle. From that moment on, David, although he holds on to his kingliness, he holds on to his place as a bird on a rooftop, the meaning of that thing is lost in a bloodbath of violence and conflict and sorrow that never lifts until the day he dies. So maybe this week has something to say to us. I mean, it's easy to kind of paper over all that with a bunch of cliches and platitudes. That's not what I mean to do. Maybe one of the things that a week like this can say to us is that we make wonderful shepherds and terrible kings. That we are designed to be shepherds, to be servants, and not to be kings. Whether you're king over a massive corporation or just your household and your marriage and your kids, whether it's a huge international enterprise or the dorm room that you live in, God's call in our life, the voice of the first prophet, is not to be a dominator, but to be a servant. Not to work our way to the top so we can drive power down to the bottom to get more and more and more out of the people who are below us, but to figure out ways to use what God puts into our hands to turn around and bless and serve someone else. The ultimate way to be elevated in this world is to lower yourself to the point where you've offered back to the giver of every good and perfect gift, whatever that is that has been put into your life, and said, God, I want you not to give me a life of what I must do or a life of what I can do. I want to live a life of what you will do through me with the assets that you've put in my hand. Steve Jobs dies with $8 billion in the bank. Couldn't it have been $4 billion and the other half spent on literacy programs? Again, I'm not trying to pick this guy out. I've never met him, but I can read the numbers. I mean, you know, when you achieve that position and yet you make the mother of your daughter raise that daughter on welfare for 2 years because you denied paternity for that long, according to one report, you are a bird on a rooftop, man. You are cut off from what's going on in the world. You are not one of us. You're trying to be a time-rich king when what God has planned for your life is to, build this great computer. I love your box. I love my iPad. I love my Macs. I'm totally sold out. I'm a complete Apple Corporation addict. I need an intervention. But none of that justifies a monarch. We won't even know the best that's in us until we put ourselves in submission to God through faith in Jesus. Hearing the voice of the first prophet. See, Israel didn't need a king. Israel just needed a shepherd writ large. Israel needed someone to serve its people, to serve its tribes, while serving God. Someone who could look at the heavens and say, we are all God's children and all God's servants, and all I do is help everybody else find their way of serving the Lord. To whom much is given, much is required. Let me say that again. To whom much is given, much is required. If we pass through a king-making context, if we have heard the voice of the first prophet, God is asking us for all of that back. For all of that back. No one should own the second BMW until every child can read. No one needs a 20,000 square foot house until every child has an inoculation. No one needs 3 vacation homes at Tahoe until every child has drinkable water. Can I get a hearty go Bears?
Go Bears.
Now that kind of thinking may sound, man, that's bizarre. It's like, if I don't get to be king, like, what do I get? You get something way better than being king. You get to know that you're walking in God's fullness for your life. You get to bless and help and change and comfort and elevate people who can't even see the palace from where they are. And you know, the truth is, if the people who pass through these contexts are not willing to do that, I don't think there's a government on earth that can make it happen. If we don't do it, no one will. God's going to put a tremendous dream in you, and the release of that dream could be the thing that turns the corner for nations of people, for economies, for the helpless, for the marginalized, for the wealthy, for everyone. If we abdicate the monarchy and embrace servanthood instead, to whom much is given, much is required. I'm going to ask you to stand with me, if you would, and our band's going to come back and lead us in some worship. And I'd just like you to do this morning. While we're worshiping and our band's leading us, I just want you to take some time today, and whatever it is that's in you, some of you guys are so smart it makes my head hurt. Whatever it is that is in you, this is a moment to just do this. Just say, God, here it is. I'm giving it back. I'm giving it back. I don't want to be a king. I want to be a servant. Now, if that servant role takes me to the top of the world's largest investment bank, then so be it. But I'm going to use that role to do good in the world. I'm going to listen to the first prophet. Just hand whatever it is, your mathematical ability, your ability in astronomy, your ability to care for people. Maybe you're a good listener, or you're just really intuitive in situations. You're a good problem solver. Just hand it back over. We don't need a blue bag for this. This is the real offering this morning. When you take the stuff that determines what you're really going to be in the world, this is the real offering. And we only have one way. We don't have 3 ways. We have one way. And that's in your heart. Say, God, here it is. I'm giving it back to you. I want you to shape this and mold this and make it what it needs to be.